Hey everyone, it's Peter Cole back with my new series for 2023. This is about best practices that I've learned when writing for TV and film. In part one of this series, which I will link to in the description of this video, and I strongly encourage you to watch that video first because that lays more of the groundwork for what kind of this industry I'm talking about is all about, specifically writing for sync placements. I can't go all over that again, so I encourage you to watch that video to kind of get up to speed. If you already know what I'm talking about, if you already know what kind of sync licensing is and writing music for sync, then maybe you don't necessarily need to watch that. However, that video touched on the number one most important concept when writing music for TV and film, and frankly, for lots of kinds of music, and that is making sure you capture the emotion, making sure the music captures the emotion, and in the context of a visual medium, you're capturing the correct emotion for that visual. So if it's a sad scene, your music better frickin' be sad. And if it's a happy, joyous scene, your music better be happy and joyous, sorry, right? So again, I'm not gonna rehash all that. Please go watch that video. But I will talk briefly about a little bit of a recap on like the sync licensing world, just because it applies directly to the concepts we're talking about today, which are how do you structure your file, which really impacts how you compose in a lot of ways, not just like the kind of the technical parts of packaging up your files and stems and stuff, which we'll get to. This is more about like literally how you compose from a structure standpoint so that it's more suitable for TV and film. So again, as in the last video, I talked about the difference between scoring versus sync licensing. So in scoring, you are writing something custom for the visual. You are working with the visual and the music in real time. You're seeing kind of the visual that the film or the TV produced, and you're writing something custom that matches that scene. And what I mean by matching, I'm talking about literally matching like the tempo, where things cut in, cut out, rhythm, hits, all these kind of things you can make custom for that scene because you're writing it right then and there in real time with the visual. Sync licensing, you're kind of writing blind. You're writing a bunch of music in a specific genre, for example, with a specific like mood or emotion in mind, right? Like maybe you're asked to write sad hip hop music, for example. So you're writing a bunch of hip hop songs, that's the genre, and the emotion is sad. So it's going to be sad hip hop. But you have no idea what the end visual is going to look like necessarily, right? They might be working on the TV show. It might not even be done. They just want to get a bunch of music that they can sync. That's where the word comes from. They can sync to their visuals. So you're kind of flying blind here, and it's what makes it kind of tough. There are some basic fundamental structural concepts that will make your music a little more useful for the TV and film world. So what I mean by that is when the all the visuals are done, like the TV show is shot or the film is done, right? And the editor now has it. And these are the people that generally are picking a lot of the music. The music supervisor might select a whole like selection of music to choose from, but often it's the music editor, the person that's cutting the visuals together, that's splicing the scenes, that's determining where the cuts are, determining where the transitions are. They're also the ones placing the music at the same time. So they're often the ones, I didn't know this until I got into this, they're often the ones that are the ones picking the music. So some of the things we're talking about today are things that are going to make their life easier. If you make the music editor's life easier, if you make it easier for them to use your music in their visual, then they will use your music. If you make it harder, if your file is complicated, and I'll talk about this, then it's less likely they're going to use it, right? So if you think about it, first you got to, write the right music, right, with the right emotion. It's got to be produced, high quality production. And then by the time you finally get into like that it's chosen and it's going to be, one of many that might be placed in the visual, now the video editor that's putting together the final work here has to actually pick your music. And here are some things I've learned over the years that they are looking at. So I'm going to switch over into Logic now. And without even playing anything, I'm just going to go over one of the main concepts. If you look at this waveform down here, the first thing you're going to see is a bunch of breaks between sections, empty space. This is essentially, right, silence. And believe it or not, this is one of the first things that you want to focus on when you are composing music for sync. You need to have breaks in your music. Why? Again, think about it. We don't know what the final visual is. What if they only need 10 seconds? What if they need 30 seconds? What if they need just a little, smidgen of music? If your music goes as a solid block for 2 minutes with no break, then it's going to be very hard for the music editor, the video editor, who isn't necessarily really having the time or maybe even the expertise to chop up a music file. They're not going to deal with that. They're going to look for the song, and they literally do this. They look at the waveform, and they make sure before they even listen to the song, they look and see, does it have breaks? These are called, in the industry, these are called edit points. These are points in the file where they can edit. So they're going to look for this break. If it's just solid all the way across, like imagine if it was just this piece of music, like right here, you see this chunk, where are they going to edit? I mean, they could probably listen to it and maybe figure something out. But at this point, they haven't even pressed play on your track yet. They're just looking visually at the waveform to see if they can even edit it. So step one, you got to pass the edit point test. Edit points are there to edit. Obviously, that's why they're called edit points. They're often also called hit points, or I think they're kind of used interchangeably, because for the visual aspect of it, it also represents a hit point, a moment in time where something is happening visually and then the action stops. Maybe it switches to something else. Maybe there's some other kind of more smoother transition. Regardless of what that second transition is, this idea of a hit point is where something is hitting and there's like a break for a second. Great example is in trailer music. If you watch movie trailers, those things are like 90% hit points, right? Every 5 seconds, there's like a boom, boom. Everything's like hitting. Listen to it. It's like all hit points. There's an edit point behind that, most likely. And again, I'm mixing my terminology here, but from a technical standpoint, an edit point allows you to edit that hit point. So making the breaks, of course, is easier said than done because it's got to be musical as well. So you're writing a piece of music and it's moving along and it's got an energy and a vibe, and then all of a sudden it just stops. That doesn't sound like music. So you don't want to, you have to make it musical. I'm going to just play this piece of music. This is by no means any sort of masterpiece, but let's just listen to the way we're going to listen to this edit point right here. So I'm going to play it, I don't know, from right here. Just listen to how it ends the first section. There's a little bit of a break, starts into the next section. Right? So it's musical because it's still staying kind of in the feeling of a song. You could imagine a song like that, but there's still a place of breaking. In fact, if we listen to it again, so listen to that. I mean, a clear break between sections, but yet it still propels forward. Let's listen to another one here. That's even cleaner, right? You have a very clear stop. This is a great hit. Back into the next section, right? That's a classic example of a good edit point because you've got a clear kind of buttoned up ending to the first section, break into the next. So again, you're going to hear this in trailer music all over the place. It's used so much that often they're just mixing different songs all together because something will come up, there'll be an edit point in one song, stop, and then the next thing that starts is actually a completely different song. They do that all the time. So it's used in trailer music almost like on everything, it seems like. But even in music for TV and film, it's the same idea. They could be using you could be using your music for the first 30 seconds, and then there's a break, and then someone else's music comes in because maybe the emotion changes, right? Following the emotion. So edit points is huge, super huge. One other thing I'm just going to bring up while we're on this subject is look at the timing here. In this case, this piece of music I was writing did not have a requirement for different, what they call cut downs. So a cut down is the other thing to be mindful of. If you're working with a publisher or a music editor or a music supervisor, find out if they need cut downs for your music. A cut down is a shorter version. So common cut downs are 15 seconds, which means it's your music, but there's a 15-second version. A 30-second cut down is extremely common, right? 30-second means it's your music, but it only lasts 30 seconds. So it needs to be like a complete piece of music, not all the parts or everything, not like the whole music, obviously, but a good section of the music that is within 30 seconds. Another common cut down is 60 seconds. Personally, those have been asked less and less over the years. I don't know if it's just me and I'm just not being asked to provide cut downs as much. Early in the old days when I first started doing this, cut downs were on everything. And so what I got used to making sure my edit points ended nice and cleanly on a good cut point. So I would a good cut down. So if I knew they needed a 30-second cut down, if you look at the time right here in Logic, this is at 21, so it's not quite long enough, right? So what I would have done if this was requested is I'd make sure that edit point ended at about 29 seconds or so, right? Usually under 30. And then that would be a nice, good cut down, and I'd already have it baked into my song. And if they asked for it, I didn't have to do a lot of reworking because it was already built into the song. That is something very important. If you're working in this biz and creating music and you want to create those cut downs, or you're being asked to create the cut downs, then make sure you're making your edit points within those cut down ranges. So again, mine is a little short here, but that's because it wasn't requested in this piece. Make sure you understand what is required of your music when you provide it to your final destination, whether that's the publisher that's creating the arrangement with the TV program, or whether you're working directly with the music supervisor or any client. Double check on whether or not they need cut downs and build that into your piece. The next thing I'm going to be talking about are two important kinds of endings. The endings, oh my gosh, the endings on this sync music might be the most important part of the music. But if the ending isn't right, and what I mean by, we're going to listen to that in a second, if you don't have a nice, tight, buttoned up ending, then they won't use it. I hear this all the time. So, and sometimes in requests, like if I get a request for type of music, it's spelled out. You must have a very tight, buttoned up ending. And what I mean by that is really, there is a concept of a buttoned ending, which literally just means it's buttoned up, which means it ends, doesn't fade. So it doesn't like fade out like the old, like Hey Jude by the Beatles, like it just fades out over time. Never do that in sync licensing. Every ending has to end, right? There's no fades. Now, of course, tails are different. So if there's a song you're playing and it stops, but then there's a tail afterwards, right? Like maybe the reverb is fading out or the instrument's sustaining out. As long as it's clean and fading nicely, of course, that's fine, right? But the thing you don't want to do is have the song play and then go and turn down your volume and have it fade out. That's a huge no-no. So always have a tight, buttoned up ending. There's a variation of a buttoned up ending called a stinger ending. And sometimes you'll get requests to create a stinger ending. And really, as far as I know, the main difference is a stinger is just a tighter, shorter, almost more dramatic ending. And it's used, if you imagine like maybe a comedy TV show or something, and there's a scene happening and all of a sudden the person tells the joke or something, and then there's a kind of a big bang with the music. It kind of stops abruptly. That's kind of how you can think of a stinger ending. Whereas a buttoned ending or a more sustained ending is, a little more natural. It's the way a more natural music would just end. Boom. So everyone wants a buttoned ending. You might get asked for a stinger. This piece of music happens to have somewhat of what I would call a stinger ending. So let's listen to it. You can get a little idea of what I mean. So again, listen to how short the ending is. It just kind of stops, very little sustain. And it's almost has a kind of that impacty kind of jump to it, if you can imagine what a stinger ending would sound like. So it's buttoned because it's nice and tight and clean, and of course, but it's also I would kind of consider that kind of a stinger ending because it's kind of sudden and it's abrupt and it's maybe not sudden and abrupt, but there's no like long tail. There's no sustain. It's a stinger, and you could kind of use that. You can imagine that in a show where something happens and they gotta have an impact with the music. Dun That could be a stinger ending. The other big thing to talk about with writing music for sync is the transitions. So we talked about the edit points, and I kind of touched on this a minute ago, but just to recap, let's just once again listen to the transition here. So you're going to hear the edit point, the hit point that ends the first part or the previous section, I should say, and then you're going to hear the transition in to the next section. And so you hear that kind of swell. In this case, I used I think like a pitch bend or something on a synth to kind of get that. That's not used as much, although it's still used. A very common one is like kind of a riser or a swoosh that kind of breathes into the next section, whoosh, or a cymbal. Shh. I'm trying my best to do sound effects, but doing transitions into scenes is something I've been told video editors love, because if you think about it, similar to the ending, where they're going to use your button ending to kind of end a scene and like put a cap on it, right? Before the next scene starts, they need that nice button ending. Similarly, they need that with the transition too, but in the transition, it's kind of like swelling up into the piece. So we're going to look at another example here in a second, but that's the idea. You kind of swell up into the scene. So let me bring up that other piece. Okay, so we're going to look at a transition. Transitions, again, between sections are extremely important, and equally important is to put a transition at the very beginning of your piece. I've heard video editors, again, tell me specifically that they look for that. They look for, does this piece of music have like a way into the scene, right? It's usually like a swelling cymbal. You can imagine and we're going to hear this in a second, a swelling cymbal or a riser or some sort of swelling momentum that kind of, very short, but it kind of slides you into the scene, slides you into the music. So songs that just start right off, of course they still get worked, or they still get used. But if you want to sprinkle a little special dust on your music and get it more potential for it to be used, put a transition at the beginning. So this is the most the one we're going to listen to right now. This is the most basic and simple one. And it's literally just a swelling cymbal. But look again at the file. You can see how there it is right there, right? It's like swelling in and then to the hit point. So let's hear that. So again, hopefully you can hear how it's like kind of building in to the music, and a video editor would be attracted to that because it's going to help them build into the scene, just as that buttoned, tight ending is going to help them end the scene. So it works both ways. All right, so hopefully this was helpful. We went over some really important concepts, and I think the other thing I just want to emphasize is kind of try your best to put yourself in the head of the video editor. They're working their butt off. They got crazy deadlines. They got all these visuals. They probably got the director, yelling at them to cut the film right, to cut it all up right. And on top of that, they're given a whole bunch of music to pick from that they're going to then sync, right? They're going to sync previously existing music to this video. That, first of all, it's got to be the right music. It's got to have the right emotion for the scene that they're capturing. And then they want something that's easy to work with, right? And the first place they look is at the WAV file. So just quick recap, they're literally looking at the waveform first, and they're making sure there are edit points. So make sure you have good edit points. And there's a relationship there with the edit point, which allows the editor to edit, right? And break up the song so it will fit into their scene. Because again, no one knows how long the scene is, right? They don't know how much music they need until it's done. So now they need a place to break up your song. It does that, and then it also can act as an impact, a hit point. So you were basically ending one scene with a bang, right? And then you're transitioning to the next scene. So again, it's another mechanism that goes into how the video editor works. So that's number one. Make sure you got edit points. The other things are the transitions. Transitions from section to section, and of course the transition at the beginning that we just looked at. It's nice to have a transition at the very beginning that kind of swells up into the piece. The ending, which is extremely important, should never fade out, right? Other than a natural sustained fade. It should be a buttoned ending that ends, and then if there's a tail or a sustained instrument, that's fine. But you do not want to do like a faded out ending. It needs to be tight and buttoned up, because again, an editor is going to use this as part of the language of the visual to indicate like a transition or a change of scene, or an ending, I should say, of a scene before the next one starts. It's really important to have a nice, clean, buttoned up ending. We talked a little bit about cut downs. That's a kind of a thing that seems to be changing a little bit. They're not as requested, at least for me, but definitely make sure if you're working with your client, make sure ahead of time, before you even start composing, if they need these cut downs, because the cut downs will determine likely how you compose the music. You will more than likely want to go in ahead of time and kind of section out, like a 15-second section, a 30-second section, 60-second section, at least to give you some sort of understanding of how it will be edited in the future. Because otherwise, let's say you don't ask them and you write this 2-minute piece of music, and then they're like, oh, well, yeah, we need you to break it all up now into these different sections. Not that it's impossible, but it's a lot more work now to go back into what you just did and have to now change your composition a little so you have some natural like breakpoints between each one of those cut down times. So encourage you to ask that at the onset. And then that last point reminds me of the final thing I just want to touch on, and it's a simple one, and that is just the length of these pieces. At least in my experience, they're almost always between 90 seconds and 2 minutes in terms of like, that's what your publisher, that's what the music supervisor will be asking for. So they're not usually asking you to compose like a 10-minute piece of music, because they know they're only going to use probably 20 seconds. And you don't know which 20 seconds either, right? But they want you to capture the emotion, a single emotion, in about 90 seconds to 2 minutes. So when you go in to create your piece of music for sync licensing purposes, focus on about 90 seconds to 2 minutes, give or take a few seconds here and there. Most the time, they don't have to be exactly those times. Sometimes people do ask for that, but most of the time it's roughly in that time range. And that's helpful, because you can, like what I do, if I know I'm going to write something for a publisher for sync licensing, I open up my Logic file and just go out to about 2 minutes. Actually, I probably go out to about 2 minutes and 10 seconds. So I have a little extra room in case there's a sustain there at the end. And that gives me a nice block of time to work. And I know I don't have to go longer than that, but I also know I should, not go too much shorter than about 2 minutes. I like to stick to that time frame. So that's it. Those are the kind of the structural ways I go about structuring songs. Now, there's a lot of other technical stuff that we're going to get into in a future video. So you're going to want to come back and see those next time. So we went over a lot, and this video was longer than I anticipated it to be, like I always say. But yeah, please come back, like and subscribe. The next videos, we're going to dive into some more technical concepts, as well as more higher level concepts of how you approach writing music for TV and film, and you won't want to miss it. So like and subscribe right now. Hit that like button, and I will see you next time. Thanks a lot.